Out on the far edge of the frontier, the desert stretches wider than the eye can see. It is a place of wind and dust. A place of heat during the day and cold during the night. A place where a man can go if he wants the world to forget him. And many men did. But none stayed as long, or as silent, as Elias Cormac. Elias lived alone at Red Hawk Well. A small cabin. A stone well. A horse too old to travel far. And a man who no longer wanted company. No one knew exactly how long he had been there. Some said 6 years. Others said 10. Only Elias knew the truth, and he never bothered correcting anyone. He woke before sunrise each day. He stepped outside into the quiet. He listened to the wind move through the dry grass. He filled a bucket from the well. He fed his horse. He repaired whatever the desert tried to break. And he spoke no more than a handful of words from dawn to dusk. That morning began like any other. The sun was still low. The ground was cool under his boots. Elias stepped toward the well with his bucket. He liked the feeling of routine. It kept his mind steady. It kept the past from creeping up behind him. He lowered the bucket into the well. The rope scratched softly against the stone. He listened to the faint splash below. When he pulled the bucket back up, he took a sip of the cold water. It tasted of minerals, old earth, and silence. Then he heard something he had not heard in months. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging. Barely holding on. Elias lifted his head. Heat waves already began to shimmer across the valley. It made the world blur. Made distant shapes dance. For a moment, he thought the desert was tricking him. But the shape grew clearer. A human figure. Stumbling toward him. The person collapsed just a few steps from the well. Elias set down the bucket and walked over. He knelt beside the stranger. A woman. Young. Sunburned. Her lips cracked from thirst. Her clothes torn by travel. Her breathing shallow and uneven. He lifted her head gently. Her eyes opened for a moment. Dark eyes. Sharp eyes. Apache eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice broke apart. Elias did not ask questions. He brought the bucket close and poured water into his hand. He let the water drip slowly into her mouth. She swallowed weakly. Then took another sip. And another. Her breathing steady. Her eyes focused on him. She studied his face, as if trying to decide something. Elias held her gaze without speaking. When she was able to sit up, she pushed his hand away. Not out of fear. Not out of anger. But out of pride. She stood with effort. She leaned against the well. She looked at him again. She seemed ready to speak. But she said nothing. She turned. And she walked away. Her steps shaky but determined. She did not look back. Elias watched her until she disappeared over a ridge. There was no reason to follow. No reason to call after her. The desert teaches you that every traveler follows their own path. And that some paths are not meant to cross twice. He went back to his work. He fixed a broken fence post. He swept dust from the porch. But the image of the young woman lingered in his mind, the way a shadow stays even after a man turns away from it. The next morning, he stepped outside and froze. The ground around his cabin was covered in hoofprints. Dozens. No. Hundreds. They circled the well, passed beside the cabin, stretched far out toward the ridges. These were Apache ponies. Light. Fast. Silent. Elias felt the air shift. The desert felt heavier. He looked toward the nearest ridge. And he saw them. Apache warriors. Not one. Not 10. But many. A long line across the ridge. Still as stone. Watching. Elias did not move for a moment. He simply breathed in the dry morning air. Then he walked to the well. He filled his bucket. He fed his horse. He checked the latch on the cabin door. Every movement slow. Steady. Calm. The warriors did not draw weapons. They did not shout. They simply watched him. He cooked a small breakfast. He sat on his porch. He listened to the wind. He ignored the eyes on him. When the sun reached the center of the sky, they were still there. When the shadows grew long, they were still there. When night came, they did not leave. Elias did not sleep much. The desert was quiet, but the quiet felt different. Heavy, expectant, as if something important was waiting to happen. On the second night, a soft sound broke the silence. Hooves. One horse. Moving toward the cabin. Elias stood on his porch. He kept his hands visible. He did not reach for his rifle. A rider stepped into view. The horse stopped near the well. The rider slid down. It was the young woman. But she was different now. Her clothing was no longer torn. Her posture was strong. Her steps certain. The desert had returned her to him, but not in the same state he had found her. She walked into the light of the small fire Elias had made. "You gave me water," she said. Her voice was clear, steady. "I did," Elias replied. "Why?" she asked. "Because you needed it," Elias said. "And water is not something a man should keep for himself." She studied him closely, then nodded. "My name is Nalan Ayasha," she said. "Daughter of Chief Taza, of the Red Wind Apache." Elias nodded once. "Elias Cormac," he said. "You are surrounded," she said. "I noticed. You are being judged." "For what?" "For the kind of man you are." She stepped closer to the fire. "The warriors watched you for 2 days," she said. "They wanted to see how you behaved when you thought you were alone. They wanted to know if you feared us, if you hated us, if you hid anything." Elias stirred the fire with a small stick. "I do not hate anyone," he said. "And I fear only things that deserve fear." "And do we deserve it?" she asked. "Not today," Elias answered. For a moment, her expression softened. Just a little. Then hardened again. Footsteps approached. Slow and strong. An older man stepped out of the shadows. Tall. Broad-shouldered. His face marked by age and storms. His eyes sharp and steady. Nalan bowed her head slightly. "Father," she said. The older man stepped forward. He held a small wooden carving. A hawk with folded wings. He placed it in Elias's hand. "You gave water to my daughter," he said. "For that, you have our respect." He pointed to the carving. "With this symbol, no Apache warrior will harm you. As long as you carry it, you walk under our protection." Elias looked at the carving. It was simple, but the meaning behind it was not. "I did not give her water for a reward," Elias said. "I know," the chief replied. "That is why the reward matters." The chief turned away. Nalan remained a moment longer. "Wear the talisman," she said. "Men without honor are coming. They will not care about kindness." Elias nodded. She mounted her horse and rode into the darkness. The ridges were empty for the first time in 2 days. The valley felt silent again. But not the same silence as before. Something had shifted. Something had begun. Elias stood alone beside the small fire. He looked at the wooden hawk in his hand. The firelight flickered across its carved wings. The desert wind carried a long whistle across the valley. A lonely sound. A warning. A beginning. And Elias Cormac understood that his quiet life at Red Hawk Well was no longer his alone. Something was coming. Something he could not avoid. Something the desert had chosen for him. The night deepened. The stars brightened. And the story of Elias Cormac began to move forward. The next morning arrived quietly. Elias stepped outside with a mug of coffee and looked over the valley. The ridges were empty. The warriors were gone. But the memory of their silent judgment still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. The wooden hawk talisman rested against his chest. He had tied it with a piece of leather string. It felt strange to wear something given by another person. He had lived too long without gifts, without symbols, without belonging. But the talisman was warm in the early sunlight, as if it carried a meaning deeper than he understood. He finished his coffee, fed his horse, and started repairing a broken fence rail. He tried to settle back into the rhythm of his quiet life. But the feeling of being watched lingered in his bones. Around mid-morning, the valley grew still. Not peaceful, just quiet in a way that felt wrong. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Elias set down his tools. He listened. He felt. He knew something was coming even before he saw the dust trail far to the north. It was a thin line at first, barely visible, but the desert has a way of telling you things ahead of time. And Elias understood that whoever was riding toward him did not come in friendship. The dust grew thicker, wider, darker. Riders. 10. Maybe more. He walked to his porch and stood with his hands resting loosely at his sides. He did not reach for his rifle. He did not move toward the cabin. He simply waited. The riders approached at a steady pace. Not fast. Not slow. Men who wanted to be seen. Men who wanted to make their presence known. When they reached the well, they stopped in a small cloud of red dust. Their horses stamped the ground. Their saddles creaked. And their leader pushed his hat back and stared at Elias with dark, mean eyes. "So this is Red Hawk Well," the man said. His voice was rough and carried the tone of someone who liked the sound of his own authority. "And you must be Elias Cormac." Elias did not answer. He only watched. The man grinned in a way that showed more teeth than friendliness. "Name's Malden Price," he said. "I run a little militia group out of the northern hills. We keep the peace. Or we try to." Elias said, "Looks to me like the desert keeps its own peace." Price laughed. "But sometimes the desert hides trouble. Trouble like Apache raiders. And we heard you got real friendly with one of them." The other men shifted in their saddles. Their hands touched rifle stocks. Their eyes scanned the land, as if expecting an ambush. Then Price pointed to the wooden hawk hanging from Elias's neck. "That there," he said, "is Apache craft. Gifted only to those who help them." Elias kept his voice calm. "A thirsty person came to my well. I gave her water. And you're proud of that?" Price asked. "No," Elias said. "It is simply what a man should do." Price's grin vanished. "Apache are enemies. You give them water, and that makes you a traitor to your own kind." Elias met his eyes. "I do not have a kind," he said. "I live alone. And I help who needs it." One of Price's men spit in the dirt. Another muttered something ugly under his breath. Price leaned forward in his saddle. "Let me give you a choice, Cormac. You throw away that talisman. Right now. And you swear you want nothing to do with the Apache." Elias did not move. He did not touch the talisman. He simply said, "No." Price's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that?" "I am." The militia leader looked around the valley. "Shame. This is good land. Could have been used for something. Now it might burn." Elias felt the warning. Price was not the type of man to leave a disagreement alone. He was the kind who tried to win by force, even when it cost him men, time, or life. The militia turned their horses around. Price spat into the dust. "We'll be back," he said. "Next time, we won't be so polite." Elias watched them ride away. Their figures shrank into the distance. The dust faded, but the threat hung in the air like a blade. When they vanished, Elias finally let out a slow breath. Not fear, just acceptance. The frontier teaches a man that trouble always finds you when you try most to avoid it. He looked at the talisman again. The small wooden hawk felt heavier now, as if it already knew what was coming. The rest of the day passed under a hot, unforgiving sun. Elias tried to work. He hammered new nails into the fence rail. He checked the horse's hooves. He patched a spot on the roof where the last storm had torn a piece of tin loose. But each sound in the desert made him look up. Each gust of wind made him turn his head. Each distant echo made him tighten his jaw. The desert had become a waiting place. Late in the afternoon, Elias walked to the well. He leaned on the stone edge and looked out across the empty land. He remembered the face of Naila Nayasha. Young, strong, wounded by thirst, but fierce in spirit. He wondered if she knew the militia had visited. He wondered if the Apache still watched him from somewhere unseen. As the sun dipped down behind the ridges, he lit a small fire beside the cabin. He cooked a simple meal of beans and dried meat. He ate slowly, listening to the lonely call of a night bird across the valley. He sat by the fire long after the sky turned dark. The stars were sharp and clear, like nails hammered into a black board of night. Then he heard something. A faint rustle. Soft footsteps. He turned. A single figure walked into the firelight. It was Nalan. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a warning. "You were visited," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "The men who came today," she said, "are not men of honor." "I figured that out," Elias answered. She stepped closer to the fire. "They will return. And they will bring more. They do not fear consequences. They do not respect balance. Men like them listen only to force." Elias poked the fire with a stick. "Are your people nearby?" he asked. "Some," Nalan said. "But we cannot interfere in the affairs of white militias unless life is taken first." Elias nodded. "I am not looking for help," he said. "I never have." "I know," Nalan replied. "That is why you will receive it when the right time comes." Her words hung between them like the warm air above the fire. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Nalan looked toward the northern hills. "You should prepare," she said. "Price will return with men who are hungry for violence. They are driven by hatred, not justice. They believe any kindness toward us is a betrayal." Elias stood. The fire cast shadows across his face. "I gave water to someone who needed it," he said. "I will not pretend that was wrong." Nalan studied him carefully. "You remind me of a kind of courage that is rare," she said. "Courage that does not shout. Courage that does not seek glory. Courage that simply chooses what is right and accepts the cost." Elias stared into the fire. He did not answer. Nalan turned toward her horse. She mounted and looked back once more. "When the time comes," she said, "the hawk will guide you." She rode into the darkness. The night swallowed her. The firelight flickered. The wind shifted. And Elias Cormac stood alone again in the quiet valley of Red Hawk Well. But loneliness felt different now. It felt like the beginning of something, not the end. He stepped inside his cabin. He checked his rifle. He checked the few shells he had left. He set a lantern near the window. As he lay down on his narrow bed, he whispered into the darkness, "Let tomorrow come." The desert wind answered him with a long sigh across the dry earth. And the night moved on. Morning came quietly. A pale light filled the valley as the first rays of sun touched the ridges. Elias stepped outside and breathed the cool air before the heat settled in. The desert always gave a short moment of peace before the blaze of the day began. He walked toward the well and lowered the bucket. The rope slid against the stone. The faint splash echoed upward. He pulled the bucket up, drank a handful of water, and wiped his face. He tried to settle back into his routine. But his thoughts kept drifting to the words Nalan had spoken the previous night. "Men without honor will return." He knew she was right. He had seen that look in Price's eyes. A look that promised trouble. He fed his horse and brushed its coat. The old animal flicked its ears and leaned into the touch. Elias whispered softly, "Storm's comin', friend." As the sun climbed higher, he gathered pieces of firewood. He walked around the cabin, checking windows and boards. He was not preparing for a fight. He was preparing for survival. Because fighting was not something he wanted. Not anymore. Around midday, the air became heavy. The wind slowed. The valley fell silent in a way that made Elias look up sharply. He felt it again. The kind of quiet that hides danger. Then he heard it. The distant thunder of hooves. Not one horse. Many. Dozens. He climbed to the small lookout rock behind his cabin. From there, he could see the northern ridge. A dust cloud moved along the horizon. Riders. Maybe 20. Maybe more. He climbed down and returned to his porch. He did not run inside. He did not grab his rifle. He stood still and waited. Within minutes, the riders approached. Malden Price rode at the front. His expression was meaner than before. His eyes full of something dark. Behind him rode 15 men. Armed. Hard-faced. Hungry for trouble. They stopped near the well. The horses snorted. Saddles creaked. Dust settled slowly around them. Price leaned in his saddle and pointed at Elias. "You had your chance," he said. "I told you to throw that Apache charm away." Elias looked at him calmly. "I kept it. And you kept your loyalty to the savages," Price said. "That makes you our enemy." Elias answered, "I am no one's enemy. But I will not lie about what I believe is right." Price laughed harshly. "You think this is about right? This is about choosing sides. And you chose wrong." One of his men called out, "Maybe he's hid an Apache in that cabin." Another shouted, "He's working with them. I say we take him in." Price lifted a hand to silence them. Then he dismounted. He walked toward Elias with deliberate steps. "You live alone," Price said. "No family. No neighbors. No one to speak for you. So tell me, Cormac, why should we let you stay on this land when you protect our enemies?" Elias stepped down from the porch. He stood only a few feet from Price. His voice steady. "I protect no one. I hurt no one. I help anyone who needs help. That is all." Price stared into his eyes. Then he snarled, "You're a fool." He turned to his men. "Burn the cabin." Elias felt something deep inside him shift. A slow, rising heat that had been quiet for years. The kind of heat that comes when something worth protecting is threatened. He spoke quietly but firmly. "No." Price smirked. "You going to stop us?" "No," Elias said. "But the desert will." The militiamen looked at each other, confused. Price spat into the dirt. "The desert doesn't protect traitors." Elias said nothing. Then a new sound cut across the valley. Light. Rhythmic. Coming from the ridges. Hoofbeats. But not heavy militia horses. Lighter. Faster. Apache ponies. Price turned quickly. His eyes widened. Warriors appeared on 3 ridges at once. First 10. Then 20. Then more. All silent. All watching. One of Price's men whispered, "They're surrounding us." Another muttered, "Maybe we should ride out." Price snapped, "Hold your ground. They won't risk a fight. There's rules out here." Elias spoke softly. "They did not come for a fight. They came for balance." Price spun toward him. "What does that mean?" Elias looked at the wooden hawk hanging on his chest. "It means your actions brought them here." Price clenched his jaw. Then he shouted at the ridges, "You got no right standing here. You hear me? No right." The Apache did not respond. They sat on their ponies, silent and still. Price turned back to Elias. "You send them away. Right now." "I can't," Elias said. "They don't answer to me." Price's face turned red with anger. "You think I'm scared of them?" Elias answered quietly. "I think you're scared of yourself." For a moment, no one moved. The wind held its breath. The horses stamped the ground. The air felt tight, like a rope pulled to its limit. Then the Apache parted their line. A single rider emerged. Naylan Ayasha. She rode down the slope with the calm confidence of a leader. Her horse moved slowly, but with purpose. She stopped between Elias and the militia. Her eyes met Price's. "You came here seeking violence," she said. "You brought fear, not justice." Price tightened his grip on his rifle. "And what are you gonna do about it?" "We will do nothing," Nayland said. "Unless you harm the man who gave water to the thirsty." One of Price's men muttered. "She speaks good English." Nayland turned her head slightly. "I learned your language so I could understand your lies." Price stepped forward. "You threaten us?" "No," Nayland said. "I warn you." Price looked at the ridges. 100 warriors. Maybe more. All in perfect silence. He hesitated. Just a breath. But hesitation is dangerous in the desert. He barked at his men. "Mount up. We ride." They scrambled onto their horses. Price glared at Elias one last time. "This ain't over." They rode north, leaving a trail of dust behind them. Elias watched them disappear. The Apache remained still. Watching. Measuring. Nayland turned her horse toward Elias. "You stood your ground," she said. "You did not lie. You did not bend. That is as rare as water in summer." Elias nodded. "I do what I can." "You did more than that," Nayland said. "You reminded the desert what truth looks like." Elias looked at the talisman on his chest. "I'm not sure I understand all of this." "One day you will," Nayland said. She lifted her hand. The warriors on the ridges began to move. They rode together in flowing lines, like a river of dust and shadow. Within moments, the valley was empty again. Nayland gave Elias a final look. "Rest tonight," she said. "Tomorrow may ask more of you." She rode away. Elias watched until she vanished behind a ridge. Then he sat on the porch. He placed the wooden hawk in his hand. He traced the carved wings with his thumb. He whispered to himself. What's coming next? The desert gave no answer. Only wind. Only silence. Only the long breath of an ancient land waiting for another choice to be made. And the night grew deep around him. A night without stars. A night that felt like a beginning. The next morning came with a strange kind of quiet. Not peaceful. Not calm. Just the quiet of a land that knows something heavy is moving beneath the surface. Elias stepped onto his porch. He looked north, where the militia had disappeared. The desert showed no signs of their passing, but he felt them out there. He felt their anger. He felt the promise of their return. He drank a cup of water from the well. He took longer sips than usual. Not because he was thirsty, but because he needed the stillness that came with each swallow. The sky grew hotter as the day rose. Elias walked to the barn beside his cabin and checked the tools. A shovel. An old pickaxe. A coil of rope. Nothing useful for fighting. Only useful for living. He ran his hand along the handle of the pickaxe. He remembered the years before the desert. Years in mining towns. Years working deep underground where darkness feels alive. Where silence feels like a weight. Where a man learns to tell the truth or be crushed by a lie. He put the tools away and stepped back outside. The sun was a heavy coin in the sky. Heat waves shimmered. The land looked tired. By noon, he heard the valley shift. It was subtle. A distant vibration in the air. A tremor of dust. The sign of approaching riders. He climbed the lookout rock behind the cabin. From there, he saw the shapes forming on the horizon. But this time, they were not militia. They moved differently. Lighter. Faster. Apache scouts. A group of 5 rode toward the well. They stopped at the edge of the clearing. One dismounted and approached. It was Nayland. Her expression was firm. Darker than before. As if she carried news she did not want to speak. Elias stepped down from the rock and walked toward her. You came early, he said. Trouble came earlier, Nayland replied. She looked toward the northern hills. Her jaw tightened. Price is gathering more men, she said. Hungry men. Men who want a reason to spill blood. He promises them reward. He promises revenge. And he promises your land. Elias nodded slowly. I expected as much. Nayland continued. He blames you for disrespect. He claims you insulted him. He says you chose us over your own. I have no own, Elias said. I live alone. Nayland shook her head. In his eyes, you are either with him or against him. There is no middle ground in men like that. Elias stared at the dry dirt beneath his boots. What will he do when he comes? He will demand your surrender, Nayland said. And when you refuse, he will attack. Elias lifted his eyes. I cannot leave this place. I know, Nayland said. That is why we watch. For a moment, they stood without speaking. A hot gust of wind pushed past them. Dust rose in small spirals. Nayland's voice softened. My father respects your courage. He respects the peace you keep. But even he cannot stop the militia from marching. If they spill the first drop of blood, only then may we act. Elias took in her words slowly. I do not want bloodshed, he said. Not on my land. Not for me. Nayland looked at him with something like sadness. The desert chooses its trials. Not you. She mounted her horse, but before turning away, she said, Be ready. Price is not coming to talk. He is coming to end what he does not understand. She rode off, followed by the other scouts. The valley grew still again. Elias returned to the cabin. He stood in the doorway and looked around the small room. A bed, a stove, a table he built himself, a single chair, a lantern, a rifle with only a few rounds left. Not much to protect, but everything he had. He lit the lantern even though it was still daylight. He sat at the table and pressed his palms together. Not to pray. He had not prayed in years. But to gather himself. To find silence inside the coming storm. Hours passed. Shadows grew long. The light outside turned golden, then orange, then deep red. A coyote cried somewhere in the distance. An uneasy sound. Elias stood and stepped outside. The sky burned with sunset colors. He watched them slowly fade into purple, then into night. He built a small fire, though he did not cook. He just needed the light. A small flame against the growing darkness. He sat beside it, listening to the crackle of wood. The night stretched wide and empty. But it did not feel lonely. Not anymore. It felt like the desert itself was waiting with him. Breathing with him. Preparing with him. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. He let the fire warm his face. He let the night whisper around him. But then he heard something new. A sound faint at first. Soft. Distant. But growing. The ground carried the vibration before the ears fully knew it. Hoofbeats. Slow. Heavy. In rhythm. Many horses. Riding as one. Elias opened his eyes. He stood. He walked to the edge of the firelight and looked out into the dark. Shadows moved across the valley floor. Riders. A long line of them. At least 20. Maybe more. And they were not Apache. Militia. Torches flickered in their hands. The flames swayed as they moved. They were coming fast. Straight toward Red Hawk Well. Elias stepped back onto the porch. He did not lift his rifle. He did not run. He simply stood there. A lone figure in the glow of the fire. A man waiting for a choice he no longer could avoid. The riders came closer. Shouts rang through the night. The glow of torches grew brighter. Elias felt the tension inside him tighten like a rope. But he did not let fear show. He had lived through worse storms than this. He had walked through darker nights. The militia reached the clearing. Their horses stomped. Torches lit the valley with dancing firelight. Malden Price rode at the front, his face half shadow, half flame. He stopped a few feet from Elias. He swung down from his saddle and stepped forward. You had your chance, Cormac, Price said. And you wasted it. Elias stayed silent. Price's voice grew louder. You picked the wrong people to protect. And now you're gonna pay for it. Behind him, the militia shouted in agreement. They raised rifles. They swung torches. The clearing filled with anger, heat, threat. Price pointed at the cabin. Burn it all. Elias stepped forward. No. Price laughed, a cold and ugly sound. You gonna stop 20 men? Elias looked him straight in the eyes. One man can stop a fire before it starts. One man can stop a life from ending. And one man can stand for what is right even when he is alone. Price frowned. You talk too much for a loner. Elias answered. And you talk too loud for a coward. Gasps came from the men behind Price. Price's face twisted with rage. He lifted his rifle. But before he could aim, a sound cut through the valley. A sharp whistle. Clear, high, and familiar. Nalan Ayasha stepped from the shadows behind the well. Her horse stood ready. Her posture steady. Her presence strong. Behind her, higher up on the ridges, Apache warriors rose like silhouettes against the stars. Dozens of them. Maybe 100. Silent. Watching. Waiting. Price spun around, panic flickering across his face. Elias whispered. The desert warned you. For a long moment, no one moved. The fire cracked softly. The desert wind brushed across the clearing. The only sound came from the restless horses under torchlight. Nalan stood tall beside the well. Her eyes calm. Her voice steady. You bring fire to a place of water, she said. That means your heart is already burning. Price aimed his rifle at her. Stay back, girl. This doesn't concern you. Nalan stepped closer. It concerns the desert. It concerns balance. And it concerns a man who chose kindness when he owed us nothing. Price barked. He chose the wrong side. Elias answered. He chose the human side. The wind picked up a bit, swirling dust around their boots. Price turned toward his men. You see what's happening? The savages think they can scare us. His voice shook, but he tried to hide it. They're bluffing. All of them. Nalan lifted her chin. We never bluff. High on the ridges, the Apache warriors lowered their spears and bows. Not aiming. Not attacking. But ready. A quiet warning. Price's men grew uneasy. One whispered. There's too many of them. Another muttered. I didn't sign up to fight an entire tribe. Price snapped at them. Quiet. They won't risk a war over one lonely fool. Elias stepped forward. I am not the reason they're here. Your hatred is. Price glared at him. You shut your mouth. But Elias did not. You came to hurt a man who did nothing to you. And you think that's justice. But it's not. It's fear pretending to be strength. The words hit Price harder than a bullet. His pride cracked. His fury exploded. He raised his rifle. This time he meant to fire. But Elias moved first. He stepped directly in front of Price. Close enough to look into his shaking eyes. If you shoot, Elias said softly, you start a war you cannot survive. Price's hands trembled. A single drop of sweat rolled down his brow. He swallowed. For the first time that night, fear truly took hold of him. Around them, torches flickered. The air felt hot and tight. The horses stomped nervously. The Apache waited. Nalan watched Elias. Her eyes softened slightly. Not out of pity. Out of respect. Elias spoke again. His voice low, but strong. You came here looking for someone to blame. Someone to punish. Someone to make smaller than you feel. But you didn't find that here. He held Price's gaze. You found a mirror. Price's throat tightened. A man hates nothing more than seeing his own weakness reflected back at him. He lowered his rifle a few inches. Not willingly, but because his hands no longer obeyed him. One of his men finally shouted, Price, we need to go. Now. Another said, they're not backing down. Look at the ridges. Price looked up. Dozens of Apache stared down at him with silent judgment. Not aggressive. Not violent. Just present. And sometimes presence is stronger than force. Price stepped back. His boots dragged in the dust. His pride cracked fully. He spat once toward the ground. "This isn't over," he muttered. But even he didn't believe his own words. He climbed onto his horse. His men followed quickly. None dared show their backs too long to the warriors. Within moments, they rode off, swallowed by darkness and dust. The torches faded. The echoes of their hooves slowly died. When the last sound vanished, the valley became silent again. But it was a different silence. A peaceful one. Not the silence of threat. The silence of relief. Elias stood in the glow of his small fire. He looked up at the ridges. The Apache remained for a moment longer. Still. Watching. Ensuring the danger was gone. Then, one by one, they turned their horses and disappeared like shadows folding back into the night. Only Naylin remained. She walked slowly toward Elias. The fire reflected in her eyes. "You stood against them," she said. "You did not run. You did not break. The desert remembers men like that." Elias replied quietly. "I don't want to be remembered. I just want to live quietly." Naylin nodded. "That is why you deserve peace." She looked at the wooden hawk on his chest. "My father gave you protection," she said. "But you earned something greater. You earned trust." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled. The well stood solid beside them. A soft wind brushed past. Naylin finally said, "Burn your fear, Elias Cormac. Not your land. Not your heart." Elias felt the weight of her words settle deep inside him. He nodded once. She stepped back, mounted her horse, gave him one last look. "May your days be gentle," she said. Then she rode into the darkness, leaving Elias alone with the silent well and the glowing fire. He sat on the porch. The night was calm. The stars bright above the valley. The desert felt different. Less lonely. Less empty. He touched the wooden hawk. For years he had lived like a ghost. A shadow. A man hiding from the world. But tonight, the world had reached him again. Not with hate. Not with fear. But with a reminder. A reminder that a single act of kindness can ripple across an entire valley. A reminder that courage is not loud. It is steady. Quiet. Simple. Like a cup of water given to someone in need. The fire grew small. The night cooled. Elias leaned back in his chair. His eyes softened. For the first time in a long time, he whispered a few words to the night. "Thank you." No one answered. But the desert heard him. And the desert remembered.
If tonight's journey brought you peace or helped ease a weight you've been carrying,